Happy Tuesday, seventh graders. I hope you guys had a nice long weekend and got some time away and enjoyed the weather. Today, we're going to get back into our angles. So I just want to quickly review. We talked about complementary and supplementary last week on both Tuesday and Thursday was our math days. So let's just quickly review here. This is read as angle WXY. So remember that angles have those three letters there. So W, X, Y is complementary to Y, X, Z. What makes them complementary is that there are two angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. We can double check that by adding 65 plus 25 equals 90. So that makes them complementary. So down here, when it's asking you these, if it's telling you these angles are complementary and it wants you to find the complement of 30, it wants you to find the missing piece, the other angle, since remember this is two angles, the other angle that would make up 90 degrees. If this one's 30, we would simply subtract 30 from 90 to leave us with 60. So the complement of 30 degrees is 60 degrees. So that's a quick review on complementary. Supplementary, angle HIJ. So if I run my pen along HIJ, which is 120 degrees, is supplementary to angle JIK. So if I run my pen along JIK, we can see this angle is 60 degrees. This one, notice I'm doing two lines, and that's one line because they are different measures. This one's 60 degrees, this one's 120 degrees. The two angles have a sum of 180 degrees. 120 plus 60 equals 180 degrees. Down here, these angles are supplementary. So if they tell you that, that means they add up to 180 degrees. How else could I know if they're supplementary? If it's 180 degrees, it forms a straight line. So if you see two angles together forming a straight line, whether it's like this, up and down straight line, okay, even if it was an upside down straight line, okay, that is two angles that still form a straight line. That means they add up to 180 degrees. So the supplement of 135, we would take that away from 180 to help us find that missing piece, which leaves us with 45 degrees. So the supplement of 135 degrees is 45 degrees. So that's supplementary. You'll see two angles that form a straight line. Complementary is two angles that add up to 90, and we know a 90-degree angle forms a right angle. Okay, so two angles that form a right angle. All right, so that's a review from last week. Now we're going to get into two different types of angles. So angle ACB. So look at where ACB is, and I'm going to outline it with highlighter here. ACB is right here. That is 75 degrees. And angle ACD. So look, ACD. These are called adjacent angles. Okay, I know this is a new word. So adjacent, all that means, there's also another word to describe this. So if you take a look, these two also form a what? If I cover up the other side, does that form a straight line? It does. So you can also mathematically check this. 105 plus 75 is equal to 180 degrees. So we know that forms a straight line. So these are not only adjacent, but they're also considered supplementary. So I want to talk about the word adjacent specifically. Adjacent means they are two angles that are side by side. So we saw last week that supplementary is two angles that add up to 180. A lot of times they did form a straight line. They don't necessarily have to be touching one another. They don't have to share the common ray right here. Okay, these make these adjacent. These two angles are adjacent because they are side by side to one another. They have a common vertex and ray, which is a common side. So let's label up here. Our vertex is right here in the middle. Okay, that is called a vertex. And this right here is that common ray, ray AC. If you look at how I labeled that, AC is that common ray, that common side that these two have in common. They may or may not be congruent. They do not necessarily have to be the same degrees. These ones are not congruent. As you can see, they're not congruent. So let me give you another example. Okay, so if this angle, we'll say, is 70 degrees, and this angle is 20 degrees, these two angles are not only complementary because they add up to what? But they're also adjacent to each other. These ones happen to because they share a common side right here, and they're side by side. They are not congruent because they are not the same angle measured degree. Could they be? Okay, let me give you an example of one that we may not see very often. So if I cut this right down the middle, now watch my lines here. Okay, and if I label this A, B, C, D to make it easy. Okay, what this means is if this has one line and this has one line, that means these are congruent. Okay, that means these are the same degrees. So I made this to be a little bit wider than a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to say this is a 100-degree angle together. So that means each one of these is 50 degrees. These are considered adjacent. They're not supplementary because they do not add up to 180. They're not complementary because they do not add up to 90 degrees. These are just a pair of adjacent side-by-side angles. They share a common ray and a common vertex right here. The vertex is at letter B. Okay. Last word we're going to talk about today is an important word. And these two often get confused with one another. So be careful here. This reads angle A or angle LMN. So let's highlight LMN. How many degrees is LMN? Okay, so angle LMN and angle OMP. What do you notice about those two angles' degrees? Okay, so what those two angles are called, because they are congruent, they have the same angle degree, and they're across from each other. These are called vertical angles. Okay, and vertical angles, and I'm going to show you another example. LMO, so I'm looking right here. LMO. How many degrees is LMO? And NMP. What do you notice about these 2-degree angles? Hopefully you said they are congruent. They're both 140 degrees. So they are considered vertical. So what makes these vertical? It is two angles formed by two intersecting lines. What does intersecting mean? Intersecting means they're crossing. So think about like an intersection. What's happening with the road in an intersection? It's crossing. The angles that are across from one another are considered vertical. Here is two intersecting lines. The angles that are formed across from one another are always congruent. Congruent meaning the same angle measure. Okay, so they're always congruent and they have the same angle measure. So if this one's 40 degrees, this one's 40 degrees because it's formed by two intersecting lines. If this angle is 140 degrees, this angle is 140 degrees because they are vertical. These are vertical. So take a peek here. You might have seen a diagram like this in our recent last weeks, but we didn't exactly know what these words meant yet. So here we see two intersecting lines. So that means their angles are vertical. So if this angle is 115, what other angle do you think is 115 degrees? Hopefully you said angle X is also 115 degrees. If this angle is 65, angle Y is also 65 degrees because they are vertical to one another. They're across from each other on intersecting lines, and their angle measures are congruent. Okay? So my little trick to remember, vertical. Okay, if you take a peek here. Okay? Vertical angles. They're across from each other on two intersecting lines. Okay, so to review, vertical and adjacent angles are angles that are formed when two lines intersect. So I showed you two lines intersecting that made like an X earlier. I just want to show you another picture of two lines intersecting here. Okay, so what do you notice about the angle measures? So if you take a peek here, the angles that are across from one another are called vertical. These angle measures are what? What also do you notice about, sorry, I don't know if it froze on your end. My computer froze on my end. So as I was saying is, I used a protractor to measure these angles, and this angle was 30 degrees. This angle was 150 degrees. So talking about our vertical and our adjacent angles. So angle A and angle B are adjacent to one another because they're next to each other. These also happen to be supplementary because they form a straight line, as well as their angle measures have a sum. They add up to 180 degrees. So knowing what you know about the angle measures, if angle 1 is 30, or angle A, I'm sorry, is 30 degrees, what is the measure of angle C? Angle C is also 30 degrees because these are vertical angles. And if the measure of angle B is 150 degrees, the measure of angle D is also 150 degrees. Okay, because these are vertical angles. They're angles that are across from each other on intersecting lines. So notice on intersecting lines, 4 angles are formed. So what do we notice about the angle measures? We notice that angle A and angle D are congruent. And we notice that angle B and angle D, yep, this is correction, sorry. Angle A and C are congruent. And angle B and D are congruent. So we know the angles across from each other are congruent. So what do you notice about the sum of all four angles? So if you add up all four of these angles, let's do some mental math here. What's 150 plus 150? That's 300. 300 plus 30, 330. 330 plus another 30 is 360 degrees. So the sum of all of the angles form a 360 degree circle. You take a peek, those would form a straight circle all the way around. So that makes that true. So just a reminder, vertical angles are pairs of opposite angles formed by intersecting lines. So up above, angle A, angle C are vertical, angle B and angle D are vertical. Okay? Their relationship, they are congruent. That meaning they're the same angle degree. So adjacent angles are two angles that share a common side, or we call it a ray, and they share a common vertex. So adjacent angles are just angles that are next to each other. So there's quite a few here, okay? A and B are next to each other. C and D are next to each other. B and C are next to each other, sharing a common side. A and D are also next to each other, sharing a common side. Okay? And what's true about these guys? So these happen to form a straight line. So they are considered supplementary because these two form a straight line, these two form a straight line, these two form a straight line, these two form a straight line. So let's do a couple problem solving pieces together. So use what you know about intersecting lines to label the missing angles in the picture below. So you notice these are two intersecting lines. The angles across from one another are the same. So if we're trying to find angle X, if this one's 148, X is also 148. Okay, what do we call the angle pair here? These are called vertical angles. Okay, these two angles are two intersecting angles, or two intersecting lines, excuse me. And these angles are next to each other. So these angles are called adjacent angles. And because these two angles form a straight line, I know they have to add up to 180 degrees. So to figure out what angle X is, I know they have to add up to 180 degrees. So 180 minus the 35, I'm basically finding the supplement of 35 degrees, is 145 degrees. Okay, so that is all for today's lesson on vertical and adjacent angles. You guys are going to practice a few in putting all of these angles together today. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.